Hello, today I'm going to show you how I made these Fox anniversary cookies. So we're going to start by making some royal icing transfers. I'm using wax paper squares on this flower nail. I'm using a star tip for this little rosette. You just swirl it around on there. Make sure you attach the wax paper on the nail with a little bit of icing first. Then you're going to set that wax paper on a pan to dry. Now for my next little rosette, I'm using a Wilton petal tip. So you want to hold this one vertically and just twist the flower nail as you swirl the icing around itself, making a little rosebud, like so. And you want to let these dry for a good while. This one is, I don't really know what kind of flower this is. It's just a pretty flower I like to make. You just kind of shake the icing bag a little as you twist the nail. Swirl it around itself like this. And it just makes a pretty little flower. So I let these dry overnight. Now we're going to go on with outlining the fox. So you want to take your time outlining. Make sure that you apply a steady and even pressure to the icing bag and let the icing kind of drag behind the bag as you go. That helps you get straight and smooth lines. Now I planned out before I made this how I wanted it to go. What I usually do is whatever shape of cookie I'm making, I search clip art of that shape. Like for this, I googled fox clip art and all kinds of cute little foxes came up. And so then I find one or a couple that I like and I just try to kind of copy them. I usually am copying a couple different ones. So I'm outlining everything first, and then I'm going to flood after I do all the outlining. You want to kind of flood right away so that the outline icing isn't totally dry before you add the flood. That will help the flood blend easier into the outline icing. So just outline and then plan to flood right away. So for flooding, I usually try to go around the outer edge first. Make sure that you're letting the flood puff up a little above the outline. That kind of helps hide your outline and just blends it together nicely. So you squeeze enough so that the icing is kind of puffing up over the edge, but not so much that the flood will overflow the outline. So the key to flooding outline, really the key to these cookies, I believe, is getting the right consistency of icing. So in order to get the right consistency, it just takes lots of practice. So the best thing you can do is watch lots of different videos on how people achieve their consistencies and then just practice and see what works best for you. The technique that works for one person might not be what works for the next person. So it's just a lot of practice. So I'm adding this next color before that orange flood is dry because I want the colors to blend together. I don't want there to be the separated look. Like I will have a separated look between the tail and the body, which you'll see. I'll let this first flood dry a little bit before I add the tail flood. But for these two colors, I want them to blend together, so I'm adding them right away. So there's like a seamless connection between them. And here I'm just taking my scribe tool and smoothing the icing out a little bit. Just making sure the icing gets into all the little corners, and trim up these ears a little bit. You can also use a toothpick if you don't have a scribe tool yet. Okay, now that that flood has dried a little, I'm going to add the tail flood. You'll see it'll having that first flood dry a little will create a little bit of a separated look. So it's kind of like a 3D look, so that the tail looks like it's actually behind the fox. And it kind of just depends on where you live and what the temperature is that day on how long you want that first flood to dry for this. It takes mine about 10 minutes to set a little bit, but it might take longer for you, it might take less time. Also, if you use a fan, it might be quicker, but generally it takes about 10 minutes for the icing to dry just enough so that you can add the next layer like this. Okay, now before you add any writing on the cookie, which I'm about to do, like pen, edible pen, you want to make sure the flood is really dry, so like 11 hours or so. Also, again, it depends on whether you dry it under a fan or what the temperature and humidity is that day. I usually like to let the flood dry overnight before I add pen details like this. So this is rainbow dust edible icing pen that I'm using to add the details of the face and the legs. I'm using a real thin one for this, and then as you'll see, I'll switch to a thicker one for the paws. And I'm going to add some furry details. This definitely is not a necessary step, but you'll see it just adds a little bit more to the fox. I think it makes it a little cuter. This is outline consistency icing that I'm using for these details. So when the flowers have completely dried, you're just going to peel them off and use a little bit of outline consistency icing to stick them onto the cookie wherever you want them. Just a little dab of icing works like glue to stick on these transfers. And for a few green leaves, you'll see I'm going to use the triangular shaped leaf tip just to add a few leaves around these flowers. You can add those right on, they don't need to be transfers. That red rosette you actually can ice right onto the cookie, but for that little pink rosebud, that one works much better as a transfer. And there you have the fox. Super cute. So for the heart, I'm just going to show you a little bit of how I did this. I'm not going to show you all the details because it's the same sort of details as I added on the fox and the number 2. But I'll show you how I did this basic layer of flood. So I'm going to use 3 different colors for this heart. First, just outline the whole heart with one color. And they're just adding a couple waves. You could do that second wave with the same orange, or you can use another color. It doesn't really matter because the flood, if you do it right, that flood will puff up over the edge and you won't see the outline anyway. I'm going to use the scribe tool to just smooth out the icing a little and make sure it reaches all the edges. So for these 3 different colors on this heart, you want to add them one right after another. You want to make sure you add each one while the other one is still wet, because you want these to blend together just like on the fox to make a seamless connection like that. For this, I made sure my flood was pretty thin and then cut the hole on the bag pretty small so that it's easier to reach into the little spaces. If it cut the hole bigger, the flood would come out quicker, but then it's harder to make it precise, like in those little corners and edges. You'll see it looks a little bumpy right now, but as it sets, those colors will all blend together. And then once that dries a little while, then you're ready to add the details. Now moving on to the number 2, this is the same sort of outline and flood as we did with the fox. When you're flooding, in order to get the icing to puff up like that, first you want to make sure you have the right consistency, and then make sure you keep the tip of the bag close down to the cookie, and then let the icing just kind of puff up around the icing bag. And sometimes I use a different consistency to outline and flood, and sometimes I use the same consistency. It really doesn't matter, whatever you choose. Just whatever works best for you. Here I use the same consistency white to outline and flood, but for the orange I used an outline consistency and a flood consistency. And here I'm just adding a line of white right where these 2 colors connect. And this next thing I'm going to do is the palette knife technique. So you want to squeeze a good amount of outline consistency icing there, and you're going to use a knife like this. You could also use a butter knife if you don't have one of these. These are good because they're offset, so it makes it a little easier. And then you just kind of spread the icing out over the cookie. It doesn't have to be perfect. You want it to have that kind of imperfect, artsy look. Okay, and now I'm going to add the writing. As you see, I'm not using a projector. You don't always have to use a projector to get nice writing. You'll see how my icing is curling up there around the bag as I'm trying to write. That's because the hole is probably not cut precisely straight across, but I'm going to work with it. When it starts to curl, you just stop and wipe it off and start again. So the consistency for this is a little bit thicker than most piping consistency, but you want it definitely thicker than a flood consistency. You want that writing to puff up but still be able to smooth out some. So for writing without a projector, the only thing I can say is to practice. That's all I can say. Find some writing you like on the internet and then just practice copying it. Of course, a projector is the best way to get it to look really nice. But if you don't have money for a projector like me, You gotta practice a little more. And here I'm adding some fox fur to make it match the fox. And then again, you just add some transfer flowers with a little bit of icing glue, and there you have it. So if you watched this video and if you enjoyed it at all, please hit subscribe and give me a shout out in the comments and let me know what you thought of this video and if there's another type of cookie you'd like to see me make. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, please just let me know. I love to hear from you if you watch these videos. Have a great day.